Welcome back to my channel, everyone. Alright, without further ado, let us dive straight into the recap of TSUKIMICHI, Moonlit Fantasy Part 35. In the previous video, the story presented a major clash that clearly showed the difference in power levels between the Kuzunoha group and the Origin side, highlighting psychological pressure, extreme strategies, and the use of area control and traps, even as Makoto managed to overcome the situation despite being cornered deep within the labyrinth. In this video, the focus shifts to the all-out confrontation between Makoto and Aznoval, offering a direct comparison of their strength, fighting philosophies, and personal limits. At the same time, the reactions of Tomoe, Mio, the Origin Adventurers, and Rose Garden frame this duel as more than just a battle, turning it into a test that reveals who Makoto truly is and whether negotiation between both sides remains possible. Now let us continue to part 35. The story begins with Tomoe already pushed to the very edge of exhaustion after facing opponents who are anything but easy. On the other side, her enemies are in a similar state. Both Tomoe and the two Origin Adventurers she is fighting, Bia and Haku, are gasping for air. They're breathing heavy and strained. Even so, the fact that Bia and Haku are still standing upright forces Tomoe to acknowledge one thing: their toughness is truly beyond her expectations. Ever since Tomoe stepped onto this enemy stronghold floor together with Makoto and Mio, a large-scale spell has been active, gradually suppressing their power. However, for Tomoe, complaining about the battlefield is nothing more than a sign of immaturity. She chooses to cast aside any hesitation and decides to fight seriously, all to ensure that Makoto does not need to worry about the situation around him. The battle continues without pause. Attack after attack is unleashed, ranging from elemental magic combinations, sword techniques, to illusionary mist that disrupts the senses. Even so, Haku and Jinibia are no ordinary opponents. Within the misleading illusions, they continue to endure, protecting one another and refusing to fall. It is precisely at this point that frustration begins to surface in Tomoe's mind, as she realizes just how difficult it is to bring down these two Origin Adventurers. Tomoe finally acknowledges their strength openly. When Haku releases 7 arrows at the same time, Tomoe responds with her illusion magic, creating 7 identical arrows, even matching the exact same trajectories. The two attacks collide in midair. Not stopping there, Tomoe uses her illusions to reposition herself in an instant, appearing right in front of Bia and immediately slashing her shoulder. Although the wound looks serious, Bia manages to recover at an astonishing speed. However, Tomoe moves even faster. In the blink of an eye, she slips into the gap between Haku and Jinibia. Before either of them can fully grasp the situation, the dragon's fingers are already pressed against the back of their necks. With their positions completely locked and their stamina drained, Tomoe releases Mist Gorim, a high-level sleep mist spell that is normally used to incapacitate an entire army at once. No matter how strong their mental fortitude is, Haku and Jinibia eventually collapse, slowly sinking into the world of dreams. Tomoe lets out a long breath, admitting in her heart that although she won, those two women were intelligent and extremely troublesome opponents. Far away from the battlefield, the atmosphere inside the control room feels tense and suffocating. Takane stares at the monitoring screens with a rigid expression, watching the Origin Adventurers and the members of Rose Garden struggle against the people of the Kuzunoha Company. The sight makes it difficult for her to believe that the side once considered superior is now being pushed this far. In the midst of that tension, a fully armored knight suddenly appears inside the room. He does not arrive through teleportation, but instead flies in manually using the White Crow ability. That figure is Aznoval. His arrival startles Taken, but it also brings her a sense of relief, as her call has finally been answered. Takane immediately explains that Rokuya and his companions are currently under heavy pressure and are having extreme difficulty dealing with the Kuzunoha Company. However, the news from Aznoval brings yet another shock. Aznoval is forced to fly manually because the entire labyrinth floor is completely covered by a massive magical barrier. While continuing to observe the flow of the battle, Aznoval explains that the Kuzunoha Company has deployed a magical barrier without Takane even realizing it. Hearing this, Takane is stunned, especially when Aznoval adds that the spell takes the form of a large-scale illusion. Only then does Takane realize that the labyrinth they control has been completely infiltrated by the enemy's magic. After analyzing the situation and understanding just how powerful the enemies are, who are attempting to resolve this conflict without resorting to killing, Aznoval makes a swift decision. A white crow lands on his shoulder and whispers the location of the next target. In the blink of an eye, Aznoval disappears, moving toward the place where Rokuya is located. Moments later, Aznoval arrives at the site of the battle between Mio and Rokuya. However, what he finds there is only Mio standing alone. Aznoval immediately asks one question regarding Rokuya's current whereabouts. Mio then informs him that Rokuya is already facing Makoto directly. After learning Rokuya's location, Aznoval briefly attempts to help Mio by trying to release the Grimtail Gear's bindings that restrain her. However, Mio's reaction explodes violently. She honestly warns Aznoval that if the bindings are forcibly removed in the wrong way, she cannot guarantee that she will not go on a rampage. Aznoval, who is wise enough to read the situation, attempts to calm Mio by saying that the bond between Mio and Makoto will not be severed. Unfortunately, Mio does not trust that explanation at all, and in the end, Aznoval chooses to withdraw and leaves immediately. After Aznoval departs, Mio falls silent and sinks back into thought. She realizes that Aznoval must have entered from outside the labyrinth area, which means that man is an ace card on the enemy side. Even so, Mio is not overly worried, because the ace card on their own side is also ready to be played. Her attention returns to the Grimtail Gear's bindings that are tormenting her, hoping that the object will disappear soon. Suddenly, a faint smile appears on Mio's face as she imagines Rokuya's fate in Makoto's hands. With a chilling tone, Mio even hopes that Rokuya can at least endure 2 strikes so that his punishment later can be slightly reduced. Elsewhere, Rokuya is startled when a head suddenly emerges from beneath the ground. It turns out to be Makoto, who appears while explaining that he had some difficulty getting out because he was trapped inside a wall. Not long after, Makoto fully emerges from the ground and begins doing some light warm-up movements, as if this situation is merely the beginning of an ordinary fight. Seeing that Rokuya is alone, Makoto immediately concludes that Mio is most likely in trouble, forcing Rokuya to move on his own. Rokuya quickly erases his presence, attempting to disappear from his opponent's perception. However, that effort proves useless. In an instant, Makoto releases an arrow that pierces straight through Rokuya's abdomen. Rokuya's body collapses to the ground, no longer responding to his commands. He fully realizes that he has no chance of defeating Makoto. Even so, Rokuya still conveys one final message. According to him, Makoto is already too late, because the Origin Adventurer's trump card has arrived. Shortly after that, Makoto senses another presence. A man appears, and it does not take long to realize that the figure is Aznoval. The two introduce themselves to one another. Aznoval then draws his sword and prepares to fight. However, Makoto calmly states that none of Aznoval's allies have been killed so far, meaning that the battle should be able to end here. He emphasizes that he and his companions attacked only because they were attacked first. Makoto also expresses his confusion as to why Aznoval's side continues to force the conflict without ever being willing to listen to explanations from his side. Upon hearing this explanation, Aznoval finally sheathes his sword and decides to listen. Makoto then explains that he has distributed his magical power to Mio and Tomoe. Tomoe herself has already defeated her opponents and has even created a large-scale illusion. Makoto firmly states that he does not want to lose even a single one of his companions, and that is the reason he chose to step in personally and support them. Aznoval then asks about Pione's condition, as she is seen crying and trapped in a state of extreme frustration. The girl even keeps shouting for the battle to stop, even though everyone is actually fighting for her sake. Without avoiding the truth, Makoto explains what really happened. He used illusion magic to break Pione's resolve. Inside her mind, Makoto repeatedly ran battle simulations, showing visions of a future where, if Pione continued to cling to vengeance and conflict, all of her companions would be slaughtered by Makoto's side. Pione was forced to witness the deaths of her friends hundreds, even thousands of times, within illusions that felt overwhelmingly real, until she finally broke and chose negotiation in order to save their lives in the real world. That is why Pione fell into despair, lost consciousness, and ultimately began wishing for the battle to end. Aznoval begins to understand that Makoto's side is using illusions on an incomprehensible scale, to the point where it becomes extremely difficult to distinguish reality from illusion. Makoto then adds that ever since he arrived on floor 20, he had already started preparing this chain of illusions. He also assures Aznoval that once everything is over, he will heal those who suffered mental damage from his illusion attacks. However, Aznoval views all of this from a very different perspective. To Aznoval, what Makoto did is no different from crushing Pione's heart. The girl was forced to repeatedly witness the deaths of her companions inside the illusion until her mind finally collapsed. Aznoval emphasizes that even though no lives were actually lost for the Picnic Rose Garden side, this outcome feels like an absolute defeat. There is no meaningful resistance, and there is no opportunity to demonstrate their abilities. The score is clear: 100 for Makoto, 0 for them. It is precisely the frustration of being unable to release their strength that has now become the greatest burden weighing on them. Makoto is momentarily confused by this way of thinking. In war, is the final result not everything? However, it does not take long for him to realize the core of the issue. His goal is not merely to win, but to recruit this potentially valuable mercenary group for TSUKIMICHI. If they harbor resentment because they feel deceived or cheated, then future negotiations will become impossible. For Makoto, their strength is a precious asset that is far too valuable to simply discard. Asnoval then delivers his assessment bluntly. In his view, Makoto still does not see far enough ahead. The decisions Makoto has made feel overly naive. Asnoval even calls Makoto a half-baked leader, someone who has been overly sheltered by his subordinates. As he speaks, Asnoval points his sword toward Makoto. He explains that the Origin adventurers have already fully grasped the power of Makoto and the Kuzunoha Company, while Rose Garden has absolutely no understanding of how terrifying that power truly is. Because of that, Asnoval demands that Makoto dispel all illusions and allow Rose Garden to witness his true strength directly. Asnoval openly offers himself as the opponent. He is willing to fight Makoto so that Rose Garden can truly understand the difference in power levels, since he is the strongest among the Origin adventurers. The rules of the fight are set simply. The battle will end when one side surrenders. Asnoval also emphasizes that he will fight seriously, and he expects Makoto to do the same. Makoto understands the intent behind the challenge and accepts it without hesitation. Asnoval briefly apologizes for having to fight Makoto, whom he refers to as the savior of the Hiragi family. Although Makoto himself does not understand what Asnoval means by the Hiragi family, he chooses not to dwell on it any further. What matters now is focusing entirely on facing Asnoval standing before him. A dense killing aura begins to radiate from Asnoval's massive body, wrapped in silver armor. Makoto does not remain idle either. With the weakening effect on that floor now gone, his condition returns to its peak. The Azusa bow is summoned into his grasp, while magic armor is activated in physical enhancement mode, completely enveloping his body. Takane, the architect of the labyrinth, steps forward as the referee. After confirming that both fighters are ready, the signal to begin the battle is given. The moment the fight starts, Aznoval immediately activates the same buff that Hitsuna used before. Seeing that overwhelming enhancement, Makoto is startled and quickly realizes the truth. Hitsuna had merely been imitating an ability that belonged to her comrade, while Aznoval is the original user of that buff. The blue aura surrounding Aznoval's body seems to confirm this fact without the need for any further explanation. After only a brief moment of cordiality, Aznoval charges without warning. The giant sword in his hands, which looks almost like a toy due to his size, swings at an absurd speed, slicing through Makoto's magic armor as easily as cutting through tofu. Aznoval feels irritated because Makoto's magic armor is truly troublesome, yet that irritation does nothing to slow his assault. Suddenly, the massive figure and his enormous sword vanish from sight. Makoto is caught off guard and briefly assumes it is teleportation. However, Aznoval's voice echoing from above immediately shatters that assumption. The knight has leapt high into the air, ready to bring his sword down with full force. The pressure Makoto feels reminds him of his first encounter with Sophia. He attempts to block the strike with magic armor reinforced by defensive magic, but the result is meaningless. In an instant, that absolute defense is destroyed, and both of the protective energy arms are completely severed. Makoto retreats in shock, acknowledging that in Zero Berserk mode, Aznoval's speed and physical strength have risen to a truly absurd level. Realizing that close combat will only put him at a disadvantage, Makoto chooses to keep his distance and rely on magic attacks and the Azusa bow. However, Aznoval gives him no room to breathe. While still in midair, the knight forcibly twists his body, converting his downward momentum into a lethal sideways attack. Makoto reads the movement and reconstructs his magic armor once more. The armor is shattered again, but it still grants him a critical fraction of a second to leap backward and evade the next slash. Unwilling to lose momentum, Makoto immediately fires a barrage of bridge shots randomly forward, creating a series of magical explosions that function as a smokescreen. Within that chaos, he remains calm, carefully aiming and releasing Azusa arrows with high precision. 3 arrows streak through the smoke, and Makoto is confident that all of them hit their mark. Shortly afterward, Aznoval emerges from the smoke with a relaxed demeanor, even praising Makoto for still being able to attack accurately while defending himself. However, the sight that follows leaves Makoto stunned. Even though the arrows are clearly embedded in Aznoval's arms and thighs, the knight remains standing tall, as if he feels no pain at all. At this point, Makoto begins to sense something unnatural about Aznoval. The man appears relaxed, yet he moves with speed and strength that defy common sense. Even more strangely, Aznoval is barely affected by Makoto's attacks, despite them clearly landing. When Makoto brings this up, Aznoval casually admits that he was once a Japanese man who became trapped in this world. He chose to abandon a past filled with tiresome games of saving and killing people that had disgusted him, and instead decided to live as a fictional knight, much like those found in games and novels. As the battle continues, their conversation does not stop. Aznoval reveals his obsession with becoming a true knight, someone who genuinely lives according to the path of chivalry. He also demands that Makoto fight more seriously and reveal his true self. Makoto, however, is confused by this demand because he feels that he has never hidden his true nature from the very beginning. Not long after that, Aznoval switches to wielding 2 great swords that immediately emit a brilliant light, illuminating the labyrinth. Makoto responds by firing arrows toward him, yet Aznoval does not move at all, accepting the attacks head-on. Moments later, Makoto realizes something terrifying. Aznoval's swords suddenly expand to a gigantic size and are then swung with brutal force. Makoto reflexively jumps to evade the slash, but the massive blades bend their trajectory and curve back toward him. Left with no choice, Makoto deploys multiple shields at once. Even so, his body is still blown away by the impact of the gigantic swords, sending him flying far back. In the middle of that situation, Makoto can only grumble inwardly that the name of the technique, Moonlight Slash, is completely unsuitable for an attack that is this enormous and savage. Meanwhile, in another room, Tomoe, Mio, the Origin Adventurers, and the members of Rose Garden are watching Makoto's battle against Aznoval. At this point, both the Origin Group and Rose Garden truly understand just how insane Makoto's power is. Tomoe herself openly acknowledges Aznoval's strength, as he is able to fight fiercely against Makoto, despite fundamentally being only a human. At the same moment, Tomoe praises Takane as a true dungeon master. She realizes that their current location is the heart of the labyrinth, a place deliberately chosen by Takane as a gesture of goodwill for a ceasefire. If a large-scale battle were to erupt here, catastrophic damage would be unavoidable. Takane confirms that analysis, admitting that her side is actually in a disadvantageous position. She herself still finds it difficult to believe that Makoto's team has managed to push them this far without killing anyone, and she hopes that this duel will serve as proof of Makoto's sincere intention for peace. The other members of Picnic Rose Garden can only sigh in agreement, although some of them continue to glare sharply at the monitor displaying Makoto. In the corner of the room, Pione is still trembling violently, traumatized by the illusion of her companion's deaths that keeps replaying endlessly in her mind. On the screen, Makoto, shrouded in a dense magical aura, continues to exchange deadly attacks with Aznoval. Aznoval has just slammed Makoto into a wall with Moonlight Slash, collapsing the surrounding stone. Makoto immediately uses the falling rubble as footholds to fire a rapid barrage of bridge spells, like a magical machine gun. Unwilling to fall behind, Aznoval summons a gigantic golden boar and mounts it, flying in pursuit of Makoto. The creature functions as a living shield, absorbing every Brid attack before Aznoval leaps down, preparing to destroy Makoto's firing position. However, Makoto moves faster. He leaps out from behind the rubble, his bow already raised, aiming straight at Aznoval without hesitation. The battle continues with an increasingly insane tempo. Makoto holds back the charge of the Golden Boar with continuous Brid barrages, while relentlessly showering Aznoval with Azusa arrows. However, Aznoval is completely unstoppable. He pushes through the storm of attacks and swings his sword, which has now returned to its normal size. Makoto's magic armor manages to withstand the slash for several seconds before finally being split apart. Makoto blocks the remaining force of the swing with the arm of his red jacket, deflecting the attack's trajectory, then retaliates with a powerful punch straight to Aznoval's face. Instead of collapsing, Aznoval breaks into a wide grin, as if he is enjoying the blow. The spectators are left stunned. The members of Picnic Rose Garden cannot comprehend how Makoto, who is fundamentally a mage and an archer, is able to endure close-range combat against Aznoval. Makoto continues firing arrows, yet the attacks still fail to deal any decisive damage. Aznoval keeps pressing forward with his massive sword, while Makoto desperately holds his ground using magic armor. At this point, it is finally revealed that the battle area has indeed been designed by Takane to suppress the combatant's power to roughly 30%. This means that Makoto is currently fighting under conditions where his strength is significantly restrained. Rokuya himself does not fully understand Aznoval's plan, since Aznoval actually wanted Makoto to fight at full power from the very beginning. On the other hand, Rose Garden begins to view Makoto from a different perspective. On one side, Makoto appears like a terrifying figure who is ready to kill without hesitation. However, on the other side, he also seems like someone who can still be reasoned with and chooses a more rational path. It is here that they begin to understand Aznoval's true intention, which is to reveal who Makoto really is through direct combat. The battle between Makoto and Aznoval grows even more intense. Makoto is not only dealing with Aznoval himself, but is also constantly forced to contend with Aznoval's sacred beasts. Eventually, Makoto succeeds in destroying those sacred creatures. Aznoval immediately recalls the remaining sacred beasts, absorbs them into his sword, and prepares to attack once again. In response, Makoto summons Silver Arm, a gigantic silver-colored monster arm. Using Silver Arm, Makoto blocks and counters Aznoval's brutal attacks, causing the silver-armored knight to begin struggling. Asnoval, however, looks pleased, because Makoto has finally started fighting more seriously. For Makoto, the use of Silver Arm is meant to buy time, giving him the opportunity to prepare a single arrow that can truly decide the battle. That opportunity finally arrives. Makoto releases his arrow, which flies straight and pierces directly into Aznoval's forehead. Aznoval's body drops to one knee. However, that victory lasts only a moment. Aznoval is an immortal being. Even with an arrow lodged in his forehead, he remains alive and capable of continuing the fight. With the arrow still embedded, Aznoval suddenly looks up and swings his sword upward. Makoto is shocked, unable to believe that his opponent rises again like a zombie. Without giving any opening, Aznoval unleashes his ultimate technique, Sword Spirit, over Rampaging Drive. The slash strikes Makoto's red magic armor and detonates with overwhelming destructive force. Intense pain, a sensation Makoto has not felt in a long time, spreads throughout his entire body. At this point, Makoto truly realizes just how dangerous Aznoval is. Aznoval himself even complains, admitting that this is the first time he has ever been stabbed in the forehead and that the pain feels genuinely terrifying. Meanwhile, Makoto continues thinking desperately, searching for a way to deal with such a bizarre opponent. Asnoval is not only immortal, but also possesses extraordinary regenerative abilities. Even though Makoto's body is now covered in burn marks and metal fragments from the earlier explosion, he does not pay them any attention at all. His focus shifts entirely toward a new strategy. Speed becomes his advantage. Makoto moves nimbly through the air, creating magical footholds to alter his direction and attack patterns, while continuously bombarding Aznoval with arrows. However, Asnoval remains calm, enduring the assault like an unshakable fortress. Makoto grows even more serious. He prepares another arrow, further increasing its power. He does not understand why Aznoval continues to fight and shows absolutely no sign of surrender. Suspicion begins to form that Aznoval might not have revealed his full strength yet. Under that pressure, Makoto starts considering a dangerous idea, imitating Aznoval's overdrive concept by making his arrows explode upon impact. Although this carries the risk of reducing his firing speed, if the attack succeeds in piercing Aznoval's defenses, the resulting damage could be devastating. Meanwhile, inside the spectator room, the Origin adventurers continue their discussion. They never expected Aznoval to keep choosing to fight after unleashing the forbidden technique, Sword Spirit, Rampaging. As fellow Origin adventurers who have known him for a long time, they are extremely familiar with most of Aznoval's abilities. Because of that, in their eyes, this battle should have already ended. There are no remaining cards left to play. To the Origin adventurers, Aznoval should have already reached his limit and should no longer possess the strength to pressure Makoto. In other words, they believe that Aznoval should have chosen to surrender. On the other hand, Tomoe and Mio react very differently. The two of them laugh as they watch the course of the battle. They never expected a human to be capable of injuring Makoto to this extent. Mio even openly acknowledges the power of the ancestors of the Origin adventurers. Tomoe tells Rokuya that Aznoval's fighting style is truly insane and reckless. Rokuya nods in agreement, admitting that logically, Asnoval should no longer have anything left. Even so, he still did not expect Aznoval to fight with such abandon. Tomoe, however, feels the opposite. In her view, if Asnoval is still choosing to continue the fight, then it means that he must still be holding onto an ace card. As a fellow swordsman, Tomoe does not hide her admiration for Asnoval's swordsmanship. The conversation between Tomoe and Rokuya continues until Rokuya finally concludes that this battle is already approaching its end. Once everything is finished, both sides will finally be able to sit down and negotiate their plans moving forward. Attention then shifts to Makoto's fighting style. Seeing how skillfully Makoto uses his arrows, Bia and Rokuya arrive at the same conclusion. They are convinced that Makoto had been using a bow even before he came to this world. His skill is far too natural to be dismissed as coincidence. Baya even argues that what Makoto learned is not ordinary archery, but a form of archery specifically designed for real combat. Just like martial arts, archery is believed to have various schools, and Makoto clearly studied one that was created for the battlefield. Rokuya is shocked by Bia's perspective. Until now, Makoto has been able to fire arrows with tremendous power, even without using any skills at all. The two of them begin to wonder where Makoto could have possibly learned such combat-oriented archery in modern Japan. On the battlefield, Makoto releases another arrow. An explosion erupts right near Asnoval's face. By now, the knight's clothing and armor appear battered and torn. Even so, a transparent shield can still be seen surrounding his body. Makoto continues firing arrows, and those attacks gradually manage to break through that defense. However, in an instant, Asnoval is already behind Makoto. He slams Makoto with a gigantic shield, sending Makoto's body flying violently. At that very moment, it becomes clear that Asnoval now possesses 4 tails, using his illusionary beasts to form additional shields. In the end, Asnoval finally sheathes his Masamune sword. With the dignity of a true knight, he acknowledges Makoto's strength. And at last, Asnoval declares his defeat, surrendering in the battle. So, that is the recap of part 35 from Tsukimichi, Moonlit Fantasy.